Hello, career thought leaders. It's good to see you today. And we are going to be talking about how we help our clients handle ageism. And this is not a new topic, right? It's something we've been talking about for years, and something that I think we thought as the workforce ages, maybe it will go away. But why hasn't it, right? We're going to talk about that a little bit, and then some strategies, baseline strategies for resumes, and then deeper strategies for branding and really connecting that we can use to help our clients navigate this space. I'm Marie Zimenoff, CEO of Career Thought Leaders, and we come here every Tuesday and talk about the new and the next in careers and specific strategies that you can use to help your clients. So let's talk about why age bias is persisting, even as much of the age range inside the US and other countries, at least, has aged, right? We're older. Why are we still having age bias? So here's the fascinating and somewhat disappointing part about bias. Bias exists even if the person who holds the bias is that thing. So when you research bias and you look at some of the work that's been done, and Harvard has some quizzes that you can take to show your own biases, what they show is that like 90 something percent of people are biased against people who are overweight, which means that yes, most people who are overweight are biased against people who are overweight. Belonging to a group doesn't necessarily mean that we're not biased against that group. So we can tell our job seekers, to go to places where they value whatever. Here we're talking about age. But just because the hiring manager that you may be talking to, it seems to be around your age, doesn't mean that they aren't biased against age. The hard part, especially related to age, is that bias exists on both ends. We're seeing this huge for our young professionals, our graduating students right now. They're facing bias, and you may say it's kind of a weird thing to call bias because it's just lack of experience, right? But it is bias that people don't think they can come in right away and deliver value. That may or may not be true of each individual in that group, right? So therefore, it is a stereotype or a bias. Then we look at the older age range, and for women, that bias starts when they are 45 and younger, depending on what research you read. So you've got maybe 10 years where you're the perfect age. And then whether you're younger than that or older than that, you face some kind of bias. And again, this bias isn't just because of the age of the person you might be interviewing with. So one of the things that I like to do when we're talking about this topic, doesn't work for all kinds of bias, but it definitely works for age bias, is to think about what are the fears that the audience is really keying in on, because it's really not about your age as a candidate. It's about their fears. And their fears may come from lived experience. Their fears may come from things they've heard or read, because we see a lot of stuff, right? Or we hear things from our friends, family, coworkers. And so this idea of fear and risk is really what causes the challenge, the tension, if you will, is that we are afraid our job seeker that we're hiring is going to do something, make us work harder, or not get their work done, whatever it is, those fears that we may have heightened associated with a certain age group, ethnic group, country, whatever it is that people have bias against. So what does that look like? And what are some of those fears? That's a good thing to think about. And we don't want to think about it in a way that makes us feel less than. We want to think about it in a very strategic and as much as possible, kind of that removed way. It's not about us. It's just about bias and evolution and fear. So I can sit there with any group of person, or a person who feels like they may face bias for a certain reason, and we can talk about what is that people are afraid of. And when we talk about people who are in an older age group, which you're expensive, you might leave soon, you maybe have health issues, although I feel like that's less of it today, but still possible. maybe that you're stuck in your ways, you won't get into the new technology quick enough. Whatever the job is going to dictate a little bit of that in terms of people's fears. Their fears are going to be somewhat connected to their experience, their industry, the things that might go along specifically with their experience, right? So here's the challenge, is that our clients are asking, should I remove my graduation dates? Is my resume too long? Is ATS screening me out because of my age? And the recent news and the lawsuits around this aren't really that helpful for our individual job seeker right now, because they haven't changed anybody's mind, and legislation probably won't change people's minds or the actions that happen on the ground for most of us. So those things are out there, and they're telling our job seeker that you're being screened out for your age, which could be true, but it's not necessarily because of a specific word or a date, right? Just taking the dates off is not going to necessarily fix this problem. Yes, hello on LinkedIn. Right, we might be afraid that someone who's older, and remember, not even just older than me, this isn't a millennial or a Gen Z person being biased against someone who's older. This could happen with someone who is very much similar in age to our candidate, that they're worried they won't take direction, they'll be stuck in their ways, all of those things. And so we've got to think about, what are those biases, and how can I make sure, kind of from the beginning of my interaction, of my visibility, that I am demonstrating that I'm not those things. And we don't need to be those things, right? Those things aren't going to make us more competitive anyways. So we're thinking about the signals that employers associate with risk, and it's not necessarily age related. So we're afraid of the ATS, we're afraid of the applicant tracking system, AI, all of those things that we read out there. And that is, that could be happening. But we're thinking about fit, and fit in a strategic, skills-based way, not in a culture way right now, although we do need to think about that. But we're thinking about, am I connecting to what the job is actually asking for? One of my early colleagues in this space, she used to say, don't overshoot the runway, right? If the job is asking for this and you're sharing all of this, you are overshooting the runway. And yes, people might say you're overqualified, but again, that doesn't necessarily have to relate to age. It's just that we are sharing and communicating more than they're actually asking for. We're not aligning to that position. We're not right sizing our stories, our impact, our communications to fit up to what they're looking for. So here's another thing that happens, and it has a little bit more nuanced, is, am I overly focused on title, years of experience, even like a feel? So 10 years ago, we started talking about how leadership was shifting, and leadership was more collaborative, right? Leadership is not this top-down concept anymore. So if you walk into an interview, you've already gotten past a few of the ageism hurdles, right? That's great. You walk into that interview and you have a certain approach, a leadership approach, a really competitive stance for any job other than a very competitive sales job. And you're automatically aging yourself, because you aren't coming across at the new modality of how communication, leadership, and presence is defined today, right? Presence today is not this top-down hierarchical, commanding kind of thing, right? And so if people see that about you, it can trigger ageism, even though it really has nothing to do with age. It has to do with how leadership norms have shifted, how communication norms have shifted. Same thing can happen with dress. If your LinkedIn picture is overly formal for the industry, the geographic location that you are targeting, you can face that ageism because you're not connected to the new norms of what's going on. And this is that research piece of it. It's that communication side of it where we're mirroring, right? We're researching and we're mirroring what we see while still keeping our own authenticity. Those two things are not opposed, right? Mirroring doesn't mean I lose myself. Mirroring means that I adapt to connect with the person on the other end. And I can do that through my communications, through my LinkedIn profile, through all of those things. So here are a few signals that show up that cause age bias. One is that senior titles, the language that is overdone, the language that is above and beyond where you're targeting, all of that says you're too expensive or you're going to be bored here in 5 seconds, right? So we don't want those signals going out that say, this is really not the level of job that I'm aiming for. I'm aiming for more than this, but this will have to do right now. That's not what we want people to see. We want them to see that you're aligned, that you're connected, and that you're sharing the skills and titles and things at the right level. The second signal that comes across is that stagnation. So this is our challenge for people who have had the same job forever. How do we help them show the change and the learning and the pivoting that they have done throughout that long work history? Because people don't want someone who has sat in the same job for 20 years. It gets that signal of, are you going to be stuck in your ways? Are you going to be able to adapt and grow with our organization? So those long timelines, we want to break them up. We want to show growth. We want to show new challenges that they've taken on in any of their communications, obviously resume, LinkedIn, and then interviewing. How can we connect all of those dots? Technology claims either that are outdated. So we've got to be careful. We've got to help our clients research that. We can't be all knowing, and we're not supposed to be, right? But we can help them connect the dots and show that they've got the right experience, the right tools. But then it can't just be a list. It has to be in context and show that they're solving problems that matter today with that technology. And we've been talking about a lot how AI and implementing AI tools inside of work can be a great benefit for this age group, because now you're bringing the experience and the discernment along together with the tool, and younger people can't do that, right? They aren't able to pair that experience with the tool. So if you show how you not only use the tool, but you used it in a way that demonstrates that experience and being able to translate that experience into value through the technology, you're going to have a much better connection with the people on the other end, because we're looking at all of the experience that you bring now put together with this new technology. And I don't question your ability to adapt. I don't question your ability to use new tools. And I see that you can do it to add value, not just because it's the new cool thing. So we need that speed. We need the application of the tool to fit together with your experience. So algorithms like AI, and not all tools, not all applicant tracking systems are using these kinds of things. So we don't want to automatically think if I get rejected, it's because of AI, right? That's not helpful. It really doesn't do you any good. You're making the connections, you're sharing the skills that matter, and you're being careful about these signals that may come across as outdated, not agile, all of those things. So algorithms can pick up the scope mismatch. So if you are overqualified, they're going to flag that. If you have, more experience than they're looking for, that, whether it's a human or the technology, is going to flag that. right? That this person is not really a fit for the role, which is challenging when people are struggling job seeking and they think, oh, I'll just take a step down. It doesn't work because you're not a fit for that step down role. You're overqualified, right? So staying in the roles that are most aligned with where you are, maybe a little stretch above where you are, will actually help reduce those ageism scope mismatch struggles. Then the seniority patterns, right? If you've been advancing, some of us might help a job seeker connect their title to what's real with that role, right? Sometimes titles are inflated, but you can't just adjust that last title. We got to look and see what makes sense in terms of the trajectory that they've been on, because those stall outs can raise red flags too. We're watching for that generic language, outdated framing, outdated tools that are going to throw up those signals faster than your graduation date ever could. Now, do you include graduation dates? Really depends on what the story looks like. If I leave out a graduation date, it could actually make someone look older than they are if I'm going back a certain amount of time anyways. So thinking about what makes sense for each individual client, there is not a hard and fast rule. I'm not going to tell you to only include 10 years of experience. That can look weird for people who are 60 to only have 10 years of experience on their resume. It feels disingenuous when I look at you and I know that you're older than your resume, right? 10 years on a resume, you're 35. That it just creates too big of a gap. I'm not going to tell you any of those rules. You've got to figure out what works for that client. 15, 20 years, maybe some years that don't have years by the jobs experiences. It's a case by case conversation, no hard and fast rules. And anytime you get that hard and fast rule answer from people, you want to question it, because our lives, our careers don't work that way. They're too different, right? They're too variable. Then we want to think about, how do we include the experience that matters, that is most relevant? Because your document, your resume, your LinkedIn profile, those are not career obituaries. They don't have to tell you everything. They don't go back to the beginning of time. They are about relevance and sharing what is relevant, what is compelling, the stories and the accomplishments that matter. That's what we want to share. And we're connecting all of that through the content and the stories that matter. Typically, we don't go any longer than 2 pages because that's just where we are. If I've got a very person who's in a role where that length is expected, 3 pages might be okay. If I'm working with someone that has 30 years of experience, but now they're applying for an entry-level role, maybe in a new industry or something, we're going to right size that down to 1 page and show the things that matter and are relevant to that new job target. The combination of who I am and what I'm targeting is what makes that delineation of what I'm going to include. So age perception is not about numbers necessarily, although the numbers can be an easy way for someone to calculate that bias or calculate that age and have bias. It's more about these signals, the seniority, the titles, the old school language, whether that's a philosophical thing or technology. And how am I connecting and showing that I'm adaptable and current and can step in and add value tomorrow, no matter what age I am? So as we look forward to this Friday, we're going to be having a fun session. We are going to be looking at some specific resume strategies, some samples. I have an older video where I went through some specific resume examples that I'll share in these in the chat. But this, we're going to go through the branding side of it, as well as some specific resume and profile examples, and talk a little bit about what this looks like when we get into the interview as well, because it flows through all of those pieces when we are coaching a client or writing for a client. So I hope you'll join us. We're going to have a lot of fun. If you use the code THANKS20, for those of you that are still hanging on here, if you use the code THANKS20, you can get $20 off this session, and we would love to see you there on Friday. And it'll be recorded, so if you can't join us live on Friday, you'll have access to the recording and the resources as long as you are in this business and we have this session up available. So we look forward to seeing you on Friday if you want to join us. Otherwise, if you're out there and you're working through the bias, think about what are the challenges that my employer is afraid they're going to have based on whatever my challenge is, age, weight, whatever it might be. How do I manage that and demonstrate that I'm not going to realize those fears for them? How do I reduce the risk that they feel in hiring me? Because they're taking a risk no matter who they hire, and they're looking for the person that has the least risk to come in, do the job, do it well, hit the ground running, which usually is an unrealistic expectation, but that's what they have, and get along with or be productive with the team that I have. And if we can do that, we can help our clients do that. They will land faster and they'll actually be probably happier where they are because they're already thinking about how do I connect? How do I fit? And how do I draw those connections through the stories and the messages that I share? So we will be back next Tuesday for another Trend Tuesday Live, and we're going to have some guests, some speakers from our upcoming symposium in San Diego with us. So put it on your calendar to join us next Tuesday, meet some of your fabulous colleagues, and get some of their tools and tips for wisdom. All right, we'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you, everyone.